Good evening and welcome to the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee meeting Tuesday, October 6, 2020. Basically, the first item on the agenda is to identify any possible conflicts of interest. The agenda and the packet is in front of you. You've had a chance to read it. Does anybody have any conflict with anything being taken up on the agenda? There being none, we'll move on to the next item, and that is citizen comment. Do we have any citizens who would wish to make a comment at this time? There being none of those, we'll go to the consent agenda. The consent agenda tonight consists of the minutes of the September 15, 2020 regular meeting, bills and payroll, monthly position control report, August treasurer report. Are there any questions about any of those? Okay, if not, the chair will entertain a motion by Wetzel, second by Paschal to approve the consent agenda as presented. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Opposed, so carried. Item number 5 is consideration of items removed from the agenda. There weren't any of those. Item number 6 is request to recommend approval of revised policy number 3.820, overtime call-in captive time pay for non-exempt personnel, presented by Jen.
Thank you. So as you know, we are getting ready to implement our new software program for both time and attendance and for our human capital management and financial software in January. And as we continue to prepare for this, we've evaluated some of the pay codes in different scenarios that we need to build into the system. So in our current model, hours worked for payroll purposes are defined as really paid hours. So it includes things like regular time, vacation, holiday, and sick hours. Those all apply to an overtime calculation in our current role. Currently, the only exception is compensatory time, where the comp hours are not used to accrue either overtime or comp time in the same work week. So as we continue to build the new payroll system, we wanted to look at that definition of hours worked and clarify that hours worked were actual physical hours worked, with a couple of exceptions. So what that would be is the regular worked hours. It would be any call-in minimums. So if someone was called into work and they had a 2-hour call-in minimum, that those 2 hours would count towards overtime accrual purposes, and then paid holidays. What would change under this new policy was that paid hours, but not physically worked hours like sick time, vacation time, and compensatory time they would be paid, but they would not apply for overtime purposes. So either process is acceptable under the Fair Labor Standards Act. But as we have looked at this new payroll system, we thought this was a time to look at a change if there was one to be made. Ron and I have collected feedback from department and division heads over the last several months and didn't have any significant objections to that. A couple of other changes in this policy. What we're looking at is changing the word of captive time in this policy to on-call time. It's a little more common out in the workplace. So as we transition to that on-call definition, we'd continue to use both captive and on-call together in these policies to avoid any confusion going forward. And then finally, there was a clarification that was made in the policy for the current incentive pay program that was approved earlier this year for the street division, where they allow the accrual of up to 80 hours of comp time instead of the 40, which had been in place in the past. If you might remember, that was a pilot program originally and then passed earlier this year in July. So in your packet, you'll find a copy of the redlined policy for any questions. We also have several of our department and division heads here help answer any questions that you might have. Otherwise, staff is recommending approval of revised policy 3.820, overtime call-in and on-call pay for non-exempt employees, and we'd like an effective date of that as the start of the year, January 1st, 2021.
What's your pleasure? Moved by Paschal for approval. Second by Handler. Discussion. Is this going to, is there any fiscal impact in this at all?
There will be a fiscal impact. It'd be a saving.
Mr. Alman, would you please address that?
Yeah, thank you. And I wanted to give you kind of a sense of scope. So we looked up the 2019 total overtime paid by the city, and it was $558,000. So the items that aren't affected by this policy are police, fire, unions. So, and they're about 70% of our overtime. So then if you narrow it down to exclude the exceptions for like call-in and those kind of things, it's a slightly more conservative version and a much cleaner to apply version of what we have. We didn't come to a specific dollar, but it'd be fairly minimal, but to the positive.
Any other questions? If not, if you're ready to vote, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. And you didn't lose your turn, Jen. I think you're up next too. Request to amend or recommend approval of policy number 3.960, personal protective equipment, tool replacement, and clothing allowance, presented by Jen Raiku. Go ahead, Jen.
Thank you. So again, looking at a few policy revisions, this policy was last updated in November of 2018. However, in this past year, the city administrator had put together a safety and security team that had looked to address this particular policy as one of their items. And so in looking, although the policy was last revised in 2018, it was more adding in clarification from different scenarios. At this point, we're looking to potentially change some of the program, which is why we wanted to bring it forward to you. So you'll see in your packet that the memo that has been provided is broken up into several areas. So various departments right now, various positions are required to wear ANSI 75 steel toe safety boots or shoes. And what the reimbursement amount has been for those particular safety items has been $100 per year, and it's been that way for quite some time. In looking at this item with the team, it was requested that we would increase that amount from $100 annually to $200 annually. Sometimes if it's a safety shoe or like a summertime shoe, they're a little less expensive, but if you get into the more warmer winter boots, for those positions that are outside, you'll see that the increases are pretty significant. And so it was felt that reimbursement would be up to $200 for those boots annually for the positions that are listed. We did put in an additional position, actually two is what we're going to request. One is the technical services coordinator that is in our Parks and Rec department. That position would be eligible for the safety boot reimbursement, and that would be based upon the fact that they help with the cemetery and plots in the cemetery. So often they need to go out into the cemetery to show different items or plots to people. So that was one that was requested. And then kind of a last minute request that wasn't originally in this practice was to include the senior GIS coordinator. I had received that request from City Engineer Tom Turchi to include that position in this, as well as that position, although it doesn't go into the field very regularly, is out there a dozen or more times per year and in all different types of weather, and felt that safety shoes would be something that would be important when they are out in that field. If you look at the next category, it's work jackets. Currently, we have some inconsistencies in regard to some departments that provide a safety jacket for their employees and some do not. So what we did is kind of went through that list of positions, and the request is to provide a work jacket for the safety of our staff and to also allow the public to better identify our workers when they're out in the field. It would be a high visibility jacket that would be marked with the City of Marshfield logo. The cost for that to have it logoed would be about $150 per year. And for the departments and the number of positions that are listed in your packet, we would look to provide that jacket once every 5 years. So you'd see that total amount kind of divvied up between the different departments over the course of the years. The next request is the sweatshirts and t-shirts. This is new for the street department. As you know, they're required to wear high visibility gear when they're out in the field, and currently we provide a safety vest. What they're requesting is that we provide some additional clothing that would help with those, the safety. So it would be 2 t-shirts and 1 sweatshirt. High visibility is what we requested, again, with the city logo. And then those would be provided to staff each year. Costs are included in the packet for that as well. The next category is wastewater uniforms. You'll see the change for the policy, and that is an increase from 7 units to 11 units per year. In follow-up with the wastewater and superintendent, this allows our staff to have one clean uniform every day for a 2-week period, and then they're laundered, and it provides them with one backup. So this really doesn't have a cost impact for this particular area, but it is a language change. They actually implemented the 11 uniforms per year as of 2020. So no budget impact, but we wanted the policy to match the current practice. The next category is tool reimbursement. This is just a minor change. We currently allow that if we have a mechanic typically who uses their own tools as part of their work, if their tool isn't under warranty and is damaged and not able to be repaired, that they have the ability to get that tool reimbursed. So what was requested by the Public Works Director was to include the facilities maintenance coordinator in that tool reimbursement program, as he sometimes uses his own personal tools and equipment to work on various projects that might be odd or unique to us without the city having to purchase those items. Just, the other item that was added into that category said the tools, if it's someone's personal tool, they have to be in good repair. They have to be checked for safety, features on it, and make sure that they're in good operating order before each use. So we did include that as well. Under eligible items for reimbursement in section 2B, section 9, you'll see that there's a list of employees that are eligible for certain reimbursements, but not the full kind of department reimbursement that other positions may get. What we did is we adjusted that category to take out the work jackets, since they're being provided if the other portion of the policy is approved. And instead, we adjusted it to include work gloves, work hats, and overshoes as the items that would be eligible for reimbursement under that category. The other piece that we did is we removed the assistant street superintendent, the street superintendent, the assistant parks superintendent, and the assistant wastewater superintendent, and put them in with their normal departments because they really spend a lot of time out in the field, as well as the workers that are in that department. So we took anything specific for them out and put them into the general category. And then the last thing that we looked at was reimbursement of prescription safety glasses. That amount has been $50 for a number of years. This would only be prescription safety glasses. We'd like to increase that to $100 for those people that do need them. In follow-up with finance, they said they get less than 5 requests a year. So this isn't a huge increase, but would certainly help those people that do need prescription safety glasses as part of their role. In terms of costs, like I said, the costs kind of vary by category, and we can certainly talk through those as we answer your questions. Each department would need to absorb these dollars into their own department budgets. We do have several members again here present to speak to their specific department needs. And again, are happy to answer any questions, but if not, staff is recommending approval of revised policy 3.960, personal protective equipment, tool replacement, and clothing allowance, effective January 1st, 2021.
Discussion? Well, excuse me, what's your pleasure? Do we need a motion on the floor first? Yeah, let's get a motion on the floor first. Mr. Handler, the motion to approve. Second by Mr. Wetzel. Discussion? Mr. Wetzel.
Thank you. Couple questions in a variety of different categories here. The jackets are provided by the city, so everything's printed uniformly by the city, just provided it wouldn't be reimbursement to the employer or the employee.
Correct. The jackets would be provided.
And the shirts and sweatshirts, are those replacing the vest or in addition to the vests?
In addition to the vest.
Okay. And tools. Are there really a lot of tools that?
No, there's not really.
Because my understanding from mechanics, and my grandfather was one and used a lot of his own tools. They primarily use things like Snap-on and whatnot that have lifetime warranties. So.
Exactly. Yeah. So we very rarely have a reimbursement for a broken tool, but it's been in the policy for a while, and we just thought it would be. You're right. I was going to say Stanley Snap-on lifetime warranty. So every once in a while, a mechanic will bring in something special to do a special job, especially with the board and trying to change out the spark plugs. You got to have that special wrench to get those out, and rather than buy one, they'll bring it in.
Okay, so the expense would be a pretty minor.
Very minor, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
No further questions.
Anybody else? Well, I gotta say, I spent 3.5 hours this morning in budget hearings down at county. And most of it had to do with personnel costs. And basically what I see here, it just, basically, the numbers given on just the three items that she was able to make a judgment on about what the cost was. Excuse me. The total of that adds, that commits the city to another $17,331 a year just for those three items. In addition to that, that is the increased cost of these. That do we know what the current cost is? We don't.
I don't have a summary of the current cost for what we
So,
spent
but
on safety.
the thing that bothers me about it is we're committing the city to a long-term obligation here. And we know the budget this year is going to be terrible. We know it's going to be an awful budget. We know what's going to happen. And here we're asking for an increase. And I'm not about to go along with it. Not at all. I mean, I understand what you're doing. I understand why you're doing it, but this is not the time to be asking for it. Anybody else? Mr. Wetzel.
Thank you. I'm going to counter that. I think this is a safety issue, and I think that it's important. I do appreciate that this is being reflected within their budgets. And if I'm understanding correctly, they're being held pretty tightly to their department budgets. So the impact, from what I see, is going to potentially require them to maybe tighten the belt on some other items within their budgets without necessarily heavily impacting the city budget as a whole. So I'm going to be in favor of this for that reason.
And, Mr. Marshall, do you have anything?
I would just agree with what Mr. Witt said.
Basically, Mr. Wetzel, they already get a benefit. This is an increase in benefit. This is the safety issue is being addressed. It's just whether or not we want to increase that. And I don't think we should do that. So that's why I'm taking the position I am. Any further discussion? What, Pete?
John, my take on the safety equipment is very important. I've dealt with those issues too, and I don't feel that we should negotiate with safety issues. Because on the other hand, we could have some terrible results. And if we could be liable for it. So I'm going to support this, even though it may have an impact on a budget, but it's just.
Thank you. Any further comments? If not, if you're ready to vote, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay.
Nay.
Good. I'm reading that as 3-2. Is that correct? You were yay. Okay. So the motion carries 3-2. Thank you, Jen. And next up is revision of policy 4.810, engagement in professional services. Mr. Barr.
Thank you. I appreciate that. A lot of times we talk about at public meetings, bids, quotes, proposals. We use all those phrases. I want to start by clarifying that they have different meanings. And Dan Knecker, Public Works Director, often reminds me of this. What he goes through in terms of their street projects is a formal bidding process where they are literally locked into the low bidder for those major street endeavors unless they can demonstrate that somebody's not a qualified bidder. What we're talking about in policy 4.810 is something different. It's engagement for professional services where the city does not have that specific statutory obligation. I sent and put in your packet the current policy 4.810. It says that the city will seek professional service RFP from consultants whenever a project is expected to exceed $25,000. The RFP process, I think many of you have been through it before. The staff would come through with a proposed scope of service and be reviewed by a committee, finance committee, or the Board of Public Works, go through to the council for their blessing, and then the process of actually seeking proposals from qualified vendors would take place, come back again and seek review and approval of the proposal the same way that we got review and approval of the proposal, the RFP itself. So the policy was last updated in 2014. At that time, the threshold for requiring an RFP was increased from $15,000 to $25,000. Prior to that, I believe it had been $15,000 for a long time. The purpose of this policy, obviously, is to ensure that the city seeks competitive quotes for professional services. So we're not just out there spending a lot of city taxpayers' dollars without finding out whether or not we're getting the best service at the best price. Given the impact of inflation and the number of professional service contracts, so that we see that now exceed $25,000, city staff is asking you to consider raising that threshold from $25,000 to $50,000. However, for services expected to cost between $25,000 and $50,000, we would still suggest that there be some sort of a requirement for competitive quotes short of the RFP process. So what I presented to you tonight is for discussion only. There's no policy revision in front of you like there was for the two that Jen just talked about. This is simply for discussion to see where you're willing to go. But our question to you is whether or not you'd be willing to consider raising it from 25 to 50, since we see so many consultant and contractor proposals now over 25,000 for even basic services, studies and so forth, with the idea that would be something we would still look for quotes from qualified vendors, but not go through the full formal RFP process. And I present that for your discussion tonight.
This is a discussion only. Anybody have a comment to make? Anybody have an opinion? Whitfield.
Sure, I'll throw an opinion out there. Normally, I would think that this would be fine. I like to trust our staff, think that this would be no big deal, but I'm a little torn because of the current financial situation, and I don't want this taken the wrong way. It's not that I don't trust our current staff, but we've had some decisions made in the past by certain staff members that have left the council scratching their head wondering. And so I don't know that I'd be real anxious at this point to make a doubling of that threshold. It seems like, even though it may make sense, it seems like a pretty big jump to me. So I don't know that I would necessarily be real anxious to jump to a $50,000 threshold at this point.
Anybody else? Mr. Handler?
I would agree with Mr. Witzel, because it's not that I don't trust our staff, but I think it's important to keep it at the same level. And being that staff may have to work a bit harder, but at the same time, we can be assured, and I can go home at night and say everything is fine. For example, what comes to mind is the legal costs, for example. We need to know that, and that, I think it was 35,000 you said, Steve, at one time. But anyway, it's something I think this committee and the council should retain that ability to make sure things are running well, and it informs us well.
Nick?
I guess I would be interested in seeing a breakdown of what some of the things that, maybe used to cost $19,000 or $18,000, and now they cost $24,000, and just to see the number and type of things that we're looking at. And then I think, if it looks like things that we normally did that now we have to get an RFP for, I think it makes sense to look at those things and say, we need to raise it by this much, whether it's to 50,000 or some other number.
Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Very good discussion, and a good point on what you just said there a minute ago. I think that the couple of things. First of all, it doesn't necessarily have to be 50,000. It could be 40,000 if you're more comfortable looking at that. And it's up to you. Obviously, that's why it's presented for your discussion tonight. It's a change. I do want to say, though, going back to what Pete just said, it's not because city staff isn't willing to do the work. I mean, we do RFPs all the time. We bring them forward to committees, get your blessing, and move forward. It's merely to try and help expedite the process, because a full RFP, takes twice as long, if not longer, than being able just to solicit quotes from, 3 qualified vendors and compare and contrast. But I totally respect the comments, especially what Nick just said about maybe showing examples of ones that are now running us over 25 and what they're for.
If nobody else has any questions, or I just want to add one comment here. One thing that used to trouble me a great deal was the ability, when we would go to league conventions and things of that nature, there would be, there are vendors who were there for various services. And they would come and say, we want to we'd like to do business with Marshfield, would like to show you what we can do, this sort of thing. But with your RFP, the way it works, they basically just ask for an RFP from their buddy that they've been doing it with before, and that's the person that gets the job. I think there's a balance between doing business with somebody you've done business with many times before, and then getting a new face or a new set of eyeballs on a problem that can take place. So I like the RFP process, I really do. And the thing you mentioned, that you would have some sort of anything between 25 and 50,000, you would do a request for a quote or something like that, or get the quotes on it. That's almost the same as going for an RFP. Maybe it's a little less onerous, but it's almost the same. So I don't see that you're saving yourself much by doing that. So I wouldn't be for this in any way at this time. So I just want to let you know that. Anybody else? Becca, did you have something, or are you okay? Yes, ma'am.
I wasn't going to say anything, but I'll weigh in since you asked. I'm going to agree. I kind of like to know what's going on, and I feel like sometimes if we aren't, brought into the loop early, we sometimes miss what's happening. So I wouldn't be in favor of increasing this amount at this time.
Okay. Anybody else need to follow up, or everybody okay? You got what you need, Steve?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And you didn't lose your turn. You're up next also.
Okay, thank you. I suppose I'll let you read the item first.
Okay. It's a request to recommend approval of a 1% adjustment to the city's compensation scale effective November 1, 2020, presented by Steve Bard, City Administrator. Was that dramatic enough?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate that. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Just a brief background, and I don't know if I even did this back in May, but just to kind of walk through how we got here, because some of you are newer than others, perhaps. But a few years ago, the city identified a need for a compensation study. This was on the heels of one that I know you, Ed, and others were involved in back earlier in 2012 and 2013 with with Carlson Detman. But we used McGrath in 2017, and ultimately the council approved a plan on April 10th of 2018. What it was designed to do is to get us to a market with other communities. They had studied many comparables and found out that in a lot of positions we were behind cities of similar size and comparing us with them favorably. So we wanted to try and rectify that in the years ahead. As far as implementation, the first year it was 2018 and 2019. Remember, our year as far as pay increases goes from July 1 to June 30th. It's not a calendar year. Was 2.5% plus steps. The reason it was 2.5% increase in the wage scale that year was because the study was already 1 year old, really, by the time we implemented. So the council was favorable to a 2.5 scale adjustment at that point. This past year, they authorized, the council did a 1% increase, and that was not approved back in May, as I mentioned earlier, and that was because of concerns with COVID and other financial issues that we're facing as a city right now. So anyway, at that time, the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee did authorize me to come back in the fall, and that's why we're here. I'm representing it for your review and discussion. The current financial situation, the city has not experienced a noteworthy drop in revenues due to COVID-19. Things have been fairly stable. We get our tax payments as we do normally, and most of the building has continued to occur in our community. And people are getting licenses. I'm not saying that there haven't been some areas affected, but for the most part, we haven't seen a significant drop in revenue so far in the first 8 months of the year. The expense side is looking relatively good as well. COVID has not had a really devastating increase on our costs. In fact, what costs we've incurred, we've largely got reimbursed, as it seems, although there's some costs that haven't been submitted for reimbursement yet. But I think you saw a note I sent out to the council recently that through the CARES program, the city got reimbursed $103,000 for eligible expenses related to the coronavirus. That included PPE, personal protective equipment, costs related to conducting elections, lots of cleaning supplies, and all these kind of things that mounted over the past several months. Through the first 8 months, our expenses overall are running at 44% of budgeted, so we're we're doing pretty well. That would suggest that it's going to be a good year. Having said that, a couple things. First of all, expenses can be seasonal. We get a couple of big snowstorms in November and December, and that whole puzzle changes quite a bit, as we know. And then some other things can be fluctuating from month to month a little bit. But at the moment, it looks pretty good for the year. But having said that, I think you know that our overall financial condition is tenuous. The chairman referenced earlier that it's going to be a tight budget, and there's no question about that. And a lot of tough decisions are going to be made along the way. We do have a structural budget deficit, and we have some debt issues we're facing. The rationale why I bring to you this 1% wage scale adjustment today is I feel that we made a commitment to our employees at the time we adopted the compensation plan back in early 2018. We've identified that some people were behind, many people were behind market where they should be for their pay scale. And we kind of committed to the fact that we didn't want to do what we did with the Carlson-Dettman plan 5 years earlier and start falling behind. We really wanted to keep up on it as best we could and implement it as fully as possible. That commitment was affirmed with council approval of the 2019 to 2021 strategic plan, the 3-year strategic plan we adopted in December of 2018. If you recall, human resources was one of the 5 pillars, along with economic development, financial management, communication, and infrastructure. And we really have said, and I think Jen might have come up with this phrase first, but it's really stuck with me, that we want to be an employer of choice. We're not going to be the highest paid employer in the area, but we want to be seen in a way that's people want to come here, they want to stay here, they feel that they're rewarded for their efforts in all areas, not just wages, but that they're treated well, that they get good benefits, and that they have opportunities with the city of Marshfield. Without wage scale adjustments, we will fall behind. I'm afraid to say that if we would go a few years with that, we'd probably end up looking at another wage study in, 2023 or whenever, and I don't think anybody wants to be there if we don't have to be. That's how we got there with not full implementation of the Carlson-Dettman study. Funding is available and was included in the 2020 approved budget that the council as a whole blessed for a 1% adjustment in the wage scale as of July 1st of 2020. And the proposed 2021 budget will only include step increases. There's no wage scale adjustment planned in what I'm going to submit to you in 2 weeks. It's just going to be whatever steps people are allowed to get in their scales as they move up the ladder, hopefully with progression. I will say this one more thing before I go to the recommendation, and that is that this recommendation would not be to go retroactive to July 1st. It would be to be as of November 1st. So it would only cover 2 months of 2020, but I'm not going to soft pedal it. That obviously means that the cost that you would add would be part of the 2021 budget in terms of the starting salaries for those individuals. So, Ron, I don't know if you have any more comments you want to make to what I said. You don't have to, but.
I'm glad to answer any questions that the members might have.
So, like I said, it's not the perfect scenario, but I think it's a request worthy of serious consideration. We want to treat our employees well, and I think that given what we're facing for the next couple of years, this might be a good opportunity to make that 1% adjustment.
What's your pleasure? Nick?
I'll make a motion to recommend the approval of the 1% pay scale adjustment.
We have a motion to approve the payment of, is that a second, Mr. Witzel? Discussion?
I have 2 points I want to make. That first is to reiterate what Steve said that about not letting our employees fall behind again. As a former city employee, I lived through that whole period where we fell farther and farther behind our comparable cities for pay and benefits. I think it's important that we stick with the commitment we made to the employees, and basically it's a commitment to the citizens as well to provide quality employees to them. The second thing is again, what Steve said about the taxes and the fees and everything are still coming in, businesses coming along. Sure, there have been some businesses that have struggled, but I think there was a report out of the state yesterday that overall, based on taxes that have been received by the state, it appears that we're not having that shortfall that we anticipated could happen. The money has already been budgeted. And while I agreed in May that we should not do it at that time. I think that at this point, we should be raising the pay scale.
Mr. Witzel?
Thank you. I think as was noted in the memo here that was part of our agenda, I had also asked for some information regarding potentially bumping it to 1.5%. And the reason why I had asked this 3 weeks ago in a conversation with, I think it was our HR director, was because at that point, our administrator had already commented that he was not planning any kind of a budget increase for next year. So my rationale there was we've already saved some money by not implementing the increase in May. Since this is not a retroactive increase, it starts in November. The money from this year's budget is already available. And since we're not looking at any kind of an adjustment for next year, this would proactively provide for that so that there's less of a hit next year with that wage increase not happening. What I guess I'm wondering, because of course, as we've talked a lot throughout the day today, there's going to be a tight budget. If we were to drop or to bump this to 1.5, what impact does that have to next year's budget? We've got the money this year. What's it going to do to next year's budget? And it looks like Mr. Alman has hand, but I'll let the chairman take it there.
Yeah, Mr. Rahman, go ahead and respond to that if you would.
Sure, and just kind of in general, Steve's right on a couple things, just a few comments. When Steve talks about the expenses today, take that with a grain of salt because, again, there's a lot of December expenses that don't show up in other months, such as snow, and then there's some HR type things such as comp time payout and those kind of things. The other thing that weights it a little bit odd is when we do our allocations, like administrative allocations from wastewater and from kids, those start in January. So just kind of keep that in mind. But Steve is right, 2020 is looking good. My concern, we obviously know the debt issue where we, said, I think the last time I spoke, we'd have to raise the levy 8% to even pay our existing debt. The concern with the 2020 is fine. The 2021 budget, though, is kind of the troubling part because, we're starting there in a deficit, and the early information we're getting back for 2021 is our general transportation aids are down, interest revenues down, and our assessed valuations flat, hopefully flat. And I know everybody appreciates Steve going to bat for his employees, but the 2021 budget is going to be even tougher than previous years.
Mr. Hendler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm not as enthusiastic about this year and the coming year. I understand the employees are anxious and they are doing a good job under difficult times. But let's think about the people that are in this community who are paying the bill. There's a rampant unemployment. There are furloughs. There are terminations. And there are over 300 plus kids that can't eat without going to the school district to get their lunch. I find it very difficult that we insist on increasing and not sharing that displeasure or discomfort with others in the community. And it bothers me. And I think all forms of government are going to be really impacted next year. And I would like to consider that the administration take the 1% off the table and also the step increases. And furthermore, consider terminations, layoffs, but not from the bottom up, from the top down. This is we're in a real situation here, folks. And I'll do anything, to keep the ship afloat. But I think wherever we can, we should consider holding the line and sharing some of the difficulties that people have in this community. Thank you.
If nobody else is speaking, I'll speak. Rebecca, did you want to speak? Couldn't see your hand. No, okay. All right, Steve,
Oh,
go
were
ahead.
you going to say something?
No, go ahead. I'll let you have-
I just want to say, and kind of playing off what Ron said, you know, I'm wearing two hats coming here tonight. I have the one hat on that Ron's talking about. And Ron and I spent several hours talking about the budget today, and it's going to be a very challenging one, a very difficult one. There are things working against us, and he named some of them. And not to mention, you understand that the condition we're in, that we're working ourselves out of the last couple of years and going forward with respects to some of the past decisions. So that side of me totally gets it. My reason for bringing it forward and speaking the way I did tonight is when I look at our employees, when I look at what we went through a couple of years ago and where we stand compared to our peers, and when we look at the next couple of years, which we know are going to be, you know, very difficult years in terms of employee, you know, pay in some respects and everything else we do, I just really believe that this might be one step we can take right now to get this in place before we launch into those next issues. But certainly I respect your decision, but that's really why I brought it forward. I think it's well-deserved. We have great employees. Many of them are still behind peer cities, and I thought it was worthy of bringing it forward tonight.
I have a question for Jen. Jen, past market rate or midpoint, the steps to each succeeding step in the sale, is that 2.5%?
Microphone.
There we go, sorry. Between steps 1 and 5, it's a 2.5% adjustment. Between steps 6 and 10, it's a 2% and
Is how much?
2%. And then between 11 and 15, it's 1.5%.
So even if this weren't passed and we followed through with the step, or with just allowing steps, most employees are going to get somewhere between a 2 and 2.5%. Well, between a 2.5% and 1.5% raise.
Correct.
Anyway,
Correct.
anyway to do that. And that adds to that's not a lump sum payment. That is an addition to their base salary upon which all other increases, either cost of living or stip increases, is based.
Correct.
So basically what I'm saying is we're buying ourselves some long-term liability by every time we do this. Now, I agree with Steve that we want our employees to be paid well. The problem is we also have a responsibility to the community. And that's where I'm getting really tangled up right now. I know I've got neighbors who have been on furlough and some have been laid off from one of our largest employers. I know that. I've got people like that. I know there are small businesses that were just startups that we were so happy we welcomed to town with open arms, and they're struggling and they're having a rough time right now. None of our people went on furlough, did they?
They're not.
None of them were laid off, were they?
The library did have some furloughs. The rest
Okay.
did not.
The point is that we're part of the community. And I in that case, I am basically agreeing with Mr. Henler and what he said. I don't feel that it would be appropriate until we know that the recovery is well underway that we can do this. And even if we did do something like this, I would suggest it be done as a bonus and not as an addition to the base of pay. But at this point, I can't support this. Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, Steve.
I'll just add one more thing based on your question regarding the steps. Yeah, it is true that many employees, getting the steps are going to get, 2% or 2.5% if they're still in the earlier parts of their time here. And I've been checking with other cities to see what their expected pay increases are for 2021, for example. And that's the range they're all coming in. 2 to 2.5% is what they're expecting to give their general employees. I can send you a sheet of that. So what I'm saying is, what we're talking about is, with steps, most of our employees are still being treated fairly in terms of adjustments to account for inflation and, keeping up with other communities. The question is, at some point, whether or not we're making strides toward what we agreed in 2018. We were behind, kind of in so many positions that we won't make those strides. But totally understand what you're saying, and it was good clarification.
The one of the things I saw that sort of rattled me a great deal at county today was an analysis of the pay increases of the total amount of county money that was used to pay for salaries going from 2011 to 2020. And when the pay raise or when the pay scale actually kicked in, we were floating along at about 2.5% per year, 2 to 2, the number you're talking about. And basically something happened and I think we started making the cost of living adjustments along with the pay scales in about 2017. And from 2017 to 2020, the pay raises averaged for the increase in total county expenditure for salaries went up over 5.5%. So 2% here, 2% there. That's what. So I'm a little gun shy. I mean that's the only thing I can tell you is that from judging from what I've seen, I think we need to be very careful about what we do with salaries because it is an increase, a geometric increase up the line. So that's why I'm feeling the way that I am. Any other discussion? If not, if you're ready for the vote, all those in favor, with the motion on the floor is to approve the 1% pay raise effective November 1st. That's the motion on the floor. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay.
No.
I see you vote hands on the nays. That's 3 nays and 2 yeas. The vote motion fails. Thank you. Any items for the future agendas? Is there somebody? Oh, no, what's the begin? Okay, go. Mr. Wetzel.
Thank you. Earlier this year, I was in a meeting here at City Hall, and we were discussing situation with employment and whatnot, and topic came up regarding furloughs and layoffs and whether or not we needed to do that. And at that time, we were assured that work was continuing and that there was plenty to keep everybody busy and that the funding was there. And so that was not looked at. But at that time, I thought that there was a discussion that future hiring would be scrutinized. And I feel as though that hasn't been happening. Seems to me that we're getting often announcements of new person hired here, new person hired there. And I guess I would like to see an agenda item next meeting to discuss the possibility of changing our policy back to what it had been in the past, where new hires get approved by this committee moving forward. In discussion with some of the difficulties that we're potentially facing, I think it might be nice if there are opportunities to leave maybe a position unfilled for a short time to save some money, that would be something that we should do. And so I guess I would like to see all new hires potentially coming through this committee for approval. That way, whoever is looking to hire for those positions can come in, provide justification for the need of that, and then we can make those determinations. The second thing that I would like to see on the agenda, and this, I don't know if it would be most appropriate here in front of finance budget personnel, or if maybe this needs a wider audience as well, but we're on the heels of the budget process. We're in the middle of the budget process. We're on the doorstep of having that budget brought to us. And one of the big question marks that we've had commented here and there, but not with specific solid numbers, and that is the impact that our current health situation nationally, statewide, and community-wide, what impact that's had on our budget. You know, we've heard 40%, we've heard other things like that. I'd like to really see some solid numbers. What have we incurred for additional costs? How much of that has been reimbursed? What have we saved? Obviously, there's not much travel happening. Conferences, even the league conference that's coming up, a lot of those things haven't happened. So there's been some savings on expenses that way. I'd like to see what we're looking at there in terms of what's actually, some true numbers of what's actually been saved. Of course, realizing that there's a an ebb and flow to the budget, and wintertime is more expensive with some of the costs, but at least if we can kind of see where we're at now, where we're sort of projecting based on budgets from the past with our winter expenses, and then how that looks for moving into the budget, I'd like to see where that falls. Thank you.
Excuse me, Jen, just speaking to Mr. Wetzel's point, do we have a personnel policy that talks about the process for hiring? And so what I think he's looking for is an amendment to that. Would that be right?
Yeah, yes, if the policy now says hiring is just open, I think we need to amend that policy to have some oversight from this committee.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? If there's no other business, I declare this meeting adjourned.